Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Nun Chet in Masechet Avodah Zarah. We are already on the top of Nun Chet Amud Aleph. Let me share my screen and we will get started. So yesterday, we heard about a case in which an idolater entered a Jewish shop and inquired about buying wine. The Jewish owner said they didn't have any wine for sale for him, but the idolater saw what looked like a wine in a bucket. So he stuck his hand in and said, "Isn't this wine?" And in response, the Jewish owner got upset, threw the wine back into the barrel, and the question then came up as to what was the status of the wine, for the barrel of wine. Rava said you could sell it, and the implication is, and Rashi understands it, that you could sell the whole thing, that it was all permitted. And Rav Huna bar Chinana and Rav Huna bar the son of Rav Nachman, so both of them said no, you're not allowed to even benefit from the wine. So, and according to Rashi, Rava changed his mind. Yeah, we're gonna have Rashi exactly. So according to Rashi, Rava changed his mind and realized that it was actually prohibited. But we hadn't, but so we heard the story of him sort of admitting that he was wrong, although he sort of only hints to it because he was embarrassed, according to Rashi. And then but we did not hear why he changed his mind. And so, as we pick up with the last word on the seventh line of Nun Chetam and Aleph at Amar on the seventh line, so we're going to see Rava now shares how he came to change his mind. So Amar Rava says, Ki asai lepumbedisa. When I came to Pumbedisa, Akfa Nachmani shematisa umasnisa da'aser. Nachmani besieged me with lots of teachings and a baraisa to show that it is actually da'aser, that it's actually prohibited. Right. So let's take a look. We're going to do a couple of Rashis here. So, Saila Pumbedisa. Hi Maisa, this story that we're about to read, Haba Mikmei Hach de Ikla Rav Huna L'Mechuza. This happened before Rav Huna came to Mechuza. Now, the previous story, so again, we had story number one was the actual incident. Story number two happens at the end, and that's after he's already changed his mind. Story number three is explaining how he came to change his mind. So the stories are not in order. That's what Rashi is telling us. And Akfa Nachmani came and besieged me. Hikifani besieged me. Abaye. It's Abaye. This person, Nachmani, is referring to Abaye. Now, that touches on the story of Abaye. Abaye was an orphan who was essentially raised by Rabba Bar Nachmani. And the question is maybe his name was actual Nachmani, but because he was being raised by somebody whose father was also named Nachmani, he didn't want to call him that, and so he gave him the name Abaye, which is sort of like my little Abba. Or it could be that Abaye stands for Asher B'cha Yerucham Yasom, that for in you the fatherless find mercy, meaning that the point is that it's a name that's based on a pasuk that talks about somebody who's an orphan, or it could be that in fact Rabbah gave the name Nachmani to Abaye because he wanted to give him this, and naming him essentially after his father. But in any event, now the reference to Nachmani here is to Abaye, Bishmuos Shel Amoraim, that there were certain rulings that the Amoraim had issued, and that was what here we're going to see what they are as well. Ubimishnayas, and in Tanaic statements, lechalok alai, and Nachmani did all this because he disagreed with me. Vila asor kol yayin hachavios, and in order to tell me that really the entire barrel, that if the Jewish market owner takes the wine that the non-Jew pointed to and pushed his hand into and moved around and then pours it back into the underlying bucket, the underlying barrel, the entire barrel is going to be prohibited to benefit from. So that is And so that's what Rava says, but we don't know what were those rulings. So Shmatasa, what were the rulings? Dahu of the Dahavi Benarda Asar Shmuel. Well, there's the story in Naharda where a non-Jew put his hand in some wine, and it was clear it was not about libation. And Shmuel ends up saying that it was prohibited. It could be that this is the story that we had 2 days ago at the end of Nunchet Amudbet, where where we say the Dasher Yisrael v'Ovid Kochavim Lahu Chamra, where there was a Jew who was moving around in the and stepping on grapes with a non-Jew. So it could be that that's the situation. But the bottom line is that somebody had moved the wine, and Shmuel said that it was usher. B'Taveria v'asur Rabbi Yochanan, and then there's the story of in Taveria, and Rabbi Yochanan also said that the wine was prohibited. V'amrilei, and I said to Abaye, excuse me, this is Rava speaking. Rava said to Abaye, Lefisha Einam B'nei Torah. Maybe they prohibited it there in those situations because really the prohibition should be just against drinking. But we wanted to make sure that nobody accidentally drank it. So we said that it's going to be prohibited against benefiting. And so as a result, maybe that's why the situation is the way it was. So Amar Li and Abaye, but Abaye said back, Taveria unarda, Einam b'nei Torah, the Mechoza b'nei Torah. So yeah, you're going to say, fine, if you want to say that they're not b'nei Torah, how can you possibly say that the people of Mechoza know enough that they should be able to be called b'nei Torah? So as a result, and Rava does not respond to that, so it seems like Abaye has sufficiently responded to Rava's concern. And Masnisa, what's the brisa that we actually have that shows that this is going to be problematic? Because of the following story, or the following brisa, the agardamim oved kochavim. If you have an agardamim, an agardam, we're going to see what that is in a moment. We're going to do Rashi and we'll tell what that is. Shekadach ben benekes v'hela, that if he pushes in a straw or some kind of tube and brings out some wine, oshita min hakos, or he goes and takes a cup, v'hekziru lechavis, and then he pours the remaining back into the cask, into the barrel. Zehayamasa v'asaruha. This was actually what happened, and it was prohibited. So my lav b'hana, isn't it prohibited by for hana? And Rava says no. Well, 1 second. Let's actually, before we get to that, let's do the Rashi. Argodamim. What is this argardamim? Adam hamamuna lishmor hamidos b'mitzvos hamelach. That the king commands that there be somebody to regulate measurements, meaning that we have it today, obviously, and you can imagine that they even had it back in the old days, that in fact the king wants to make sure that if you buy a barrel of wine, it's not too diluted and it's not too, well, I mean, I probably doesn't mind if it's too concentrated, but he doesn't want people selling diluted product as the actual thing itself. And so as a result, they would have people go around, taste the wine to make sure that it wasn't too diluted. Shelo yishakru behem. So because we want to make sure that people aren't lying. V'toem hayayin, and so he would taste the wine. V'naseh sarsur beineim, and actually serve as almost like a middleman between the marketer and the customer, so that as a result, everybody would know this is good wine. This is somebody we can trust this person who's able to have good taste buds in order to figure it out. And what is this word agardamim? Agardamim garsinam b'mem. It actually is, the word is agardamim as opposed to agardamis. And b'Torah's Kohanim, and in the Midrash on Sefer Vayikra, Amrinan Ephas Tzedek v'hin Tzedek. It says that we have to have righteous measurements. Yelachem, that you should have those righteous measurements. And what does that mean? Manalacha, the Torah, the Midrash says that you should appoint for yourselves agardamim al kacha. You should appoint yourselves regulators. Basically, these are regulators in order to make sure that that everything is kosher. That we don't use wrong measurements, and people are honest in their business. So now the Gemara, again, back into the Gemara, and so we're now right after the word va'asru, which has the letter bet in front of it. It's I guess 3, 6, 9, 12 lines up from the bottom of the daf. And right after that word, it says, my lav bahana. So what's the implication? The implication is that these are all prohibited for drinking. So Abaye tries to save himself and says, no, lo, b'shasiya. It's prohibited it's prohibited from benefit. And so Rava says, no, it's only prohibited for drinking. But Abaye points out that can't be. If that were true, that it was only prohibited for drinking and you can benefit from it, then the brisa should have said that the wine could be sold. Because what is the end of this brisa? Kedegatani seifa. Charam Ovid Kochavim. If you've got a Charam who's an Ovid Kochavim, and Rashi tells us who that is, 4 lines up in the Rashi from the bottom of the daf, Nun Chedem and Aleph, Meshuga. It's somebody who's crazy, Ubal Marivos, and gets into lots of arguments. Umemaher la'asos shelo b'gavana, and he does things. He's wild with his hands. He's wild with his whole body. He doesn't think before he acts. He just does. And so as a result, that kind of crazy person, Shahoshit yado lechavis. He sticks his hand into a barrel. The kasaver shel shemini, and he thought that it was oil in that barrel. This crazy non-Jew, and so umvinimtzis shel yayin, and it turns out that it's wine. So zeh hayamaisa, this actually happened. Va'amru yimacher, and in that situation, even though we have this prohibition of yayin nesach, where if a non-Jew touches wine, we say that it's prohibited to benefit from it. In this case, where the guy's intentions were not to touch wine, and it wasn't really intention to touch anything at all, because he's kind of crazy. So as a result, in that situation, you still can't drink it, but at that situation, you're allowed to sell it. So tiyufta derava tiyufta, this in fact is a refutation of Rava, and so we're done. And let's take a look in the last Rashi on the daf. Yemacher dehoel desaver shel shemen haya. Since this non-Jew thought it was oil, leika lemigzar. Therefore, there's no point to making a gezerah shemen iskaven lenesach. That maybe he had some intention to engage in libations for an idol, because he didn't know that this was wine and not oil. Aval kadak b'minkas. But in the prior case, where the person knows that it's wine and he sticks in a tube in order to taste it and make sure that it's not too concentrated, he knows that it's wine. So in that situation where he knows it's wine, we're worried that maybe he engaged in some sort of idolatrous worship with the wine, and therefore not only is it going to be prohibited to drink, but it's going to be prohibited to benefit from. Okay, so that's that story. So now we have another story. So let's scroll up. So just make sure we get that whole page. Okay, and so now we have our next story, and the Gemara discusses another case of an idolater touching wine. And so it says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Arza, and here we have an interesting situation. What happens if the Jews who are drinking think that the person is Jewish, and the person who's being asked to pour for them knows that they think that he's Jewish, but it turns out that he's not Jewish? So Rabbi Yochanan ben Arza, Rabbi Yossi ben Nehorai, Havu Yasvu v'Kashasu Chamra. So Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yossi were drinking some wine. Asahu Gavra, a person came by, Amrulay, and they said to him, Ta Ashkinan, pour us a little bit. Come and pour us. So Levasar, the Rama, l'chasa, after he pours it into the cup, Igolai milsa de obikochavimhu. It becomes clear that he's not a Jew. He's an idolater. So, oh my gosh, we didn't realize. So, Chad Asar Afilu Bahana. One said that it was even prohibited to benefit. V'chad Shari Afilu B'Shasiya. And one of the rabbis said, nah, we could even drink it, meaning it's the complete extremes. And you know what? Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, Man de Aser, Shaper Aser, Uman de Shari, Shaper Shari. Actually, both of them had a logical argument to it. The one, so Man de Aser, as we turn to Nun Chedam Abed, the one who said it was prohibited, how come it made sense? It made sense because of the following argument. Meimar Amar, we could say the following, Salka Daite de Rabbanan Kihani Shichra Kashasu. Look, it can't possibly be that these rabbis, because they're so important, are drinking beer. They must be drinking wine. And so as a result, Elavadai Chai Chamrahu, this has got to be wine. And therefore, v'nasche. And therefore, I'm going to do yayin nesech. I'm going to do a libation. And as a result, I'm going to really get these rabbis. Meaning that the person, the one that says that it should be usser, is saying, look, this guy, even though he knows he's not Jewish, we think he's Jewish, but or we know he's not Jewish, but he knows that we're not going to be drinking beer. That's too base. And so as a result, he's going to take advantage of his situation and make things bad for us. And so as a result, we certainly cannot drink the wine. Amanda Shari, Shapi Shari. And the one who thought it was permitted, it made sense as well. Why? Meimar Amar. Because maybe this guy would say to himself, Salka daite de Rabbanan kihani chamra kashasu va'amru li l'didi ta ashkinan. Could the rabbis, I know that there's this prohibition about non-Jews touching wine. So could the rabbis have possibly asked me to pour wine for them? Of course not. It must be that the rabbis think that the rabbis are asking me to pour beer. And so as a result, the guy thinks he's pouring beer. So as a result, rather, they must be drinking beer. And so as a result, he would never think to do a libation. You don't do libations with beer, you do libations with wine. And so as a result, that's why it would be permitted. But now the Gemara asks on that last opinion, but isn't he going to see what he's pouring and thereby know that it's wine? No, Belelia, this whole story happened at night. 1 second, but he could smell it. So no, bechadta. As Rashi says, 1, 2, 3, 5 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi. Yayin chadash ein lo reach. That if you have a brand new wine, it's not going to smell so much, and so as a result, the smell did not give away that it was wine. V'hakanaga be bidnatla. But 1 second, right now the presumption is that he stuck a ladle into the barrel, pulled it out, and then poured into the 2 cups. And if he did that, well then, havale maga obikochavim shalo bekavana. It was still a non-Jew touching wine unintentionally. And if a non-Jew touches wine, it should at least be prohibited to drink from. Remember back we saw that when it came to the lulav case, where the guy touches the wine with the lulav accidentally, again, it was still at least prohibited to drink from. And so shouldn't it be prohibited to drink from? So, lo tricha deka morik orike. So I'm sorry, and therefore it should be prohibited. And Rashi helps us out here. Take a look at Rashi. V'ha kanaga benatla salka daitich. At the moment we think shahaya shoiv hayayin me'achavis bekli shmo natla, that the person who was not Jewish took the wine out of the barrels with a kli called the natla, which is basically a ladle. Uparich, and we're asking, v'hanaga be b'chamra, he touched the wine al yedei natla, through the ladle. V'nehi nami delo yada dechamrahu. And even though he didn't realize it was wine, havale maga shalo b'kavana v'aser. And it should at least be a wine touching that was unintentional and still be prohibited. Umishani, and so now the Gemara answers, Lo tzricha de kamorik orike. It's got to be a case where he was pouring it directly out of the barrel into the cups. V'havale koko shalo b'kavana. And as a result, it's his using a force without intention. This is a remarkable thing because one might have thought, listen, um, I'm touching the bottle of wine.
Right.
Shouldn't that be equal to putting a ladle into the wine? What's the difference between my touching the bottle where the wine is and pouring it and putting a ladle in and pulling it out? But the answer is that the ladle wasn't touching the wine before, and now because of the non-Jew putting the ladle in, now you have something new touching the wine as a result of the non-Jew's action. And that is considered worse than the non-Jew touching the bottle and just pouring it. And so that's the situation. And so as a result, as we say in Rashi, okay, let's finish the idea and then we'll do Rashi. This is only a force, meaning it isn't considered touching, it's considered moving. And so as a result, the kol kocho shelo b'kavana, and when all you have is the power of the non-Jew moving the wine without something new touching the wine, lo gazru be rabbanim, the rabbis did not make a decree. Let's take a look and we'll see. Umishani de kamorik oriki, the next Rashi, v'havale kocho shelo b'kavana. This is a movement that does not have any intention. Why? Shalo yada shehu yain. He doesn't know that there's wine in here. The koko shalo b'kavana lo gazer afilu b'shtia. And so when you have, all you have is a force, and you have the fact that the guy doesn't know that it's wine, those two factors end up being sufficient to take you from prohibited to benefit all the way to kosher to drink. So it's remarkable. So, but you have those two factors. If you only had one of those factors, meaning if he poured it knowing it was wine, but it was all he has is his force, then it would be prohibited to drink. And if he thought it was oil, but it was actually wine, and he stuck a ladle into it, it would also be prohibited to drink. It wouldn't be prohibited to benefit from, but it would be prohibited to drink. So you have these two things when you combine both of them, that the guy didn't know that it was wine, and he didn't bring some new object into contact with it. As a result, according to that, it's permitted to drink. And both of these logics are correct. And so as a result, the actual question that we would have in this case is which one is actually applicable to this particular non-Jew. And so that's the situation. If he in fact didn't thought to himself, these guys must be asking me to pour beer, then everything is kosher. And if in fact he's like, oh, I'm going to be able to get these guys, well, then everything is aser bahana.
Oh, that would be presumed that the bottle is not transparent, right?
Well, remember we said that it's nighttime. So even if the bottle is transparent, and we're talking about a barrel, I just used the bottle to make it an easier conversation, but really we're talking about a barrel, and so as a result, it's not, it's not, the barrels aren't see-through.
But I'm thinking about a waiter pouring wine from a bottle in a restaurant.
Correct. But remember, he knows that it's wine. And so as a result, when he knows that it's wine, it becomes immediately prohibited to drink. You're allowed to benefit from it, but you're not allowed to drink it. And so as a result, that's why you cannot have a non-Jewish waiter pouring the wine. Now, there is a shach that says that you can, and Rav Moshe says that in a case of loss you might be able to. But the bottom line is that if the non-Jew knows that it's wine, that and the only reason that we say that is because the non-Jews of today aren't actually idolaters in general. But the bottom line is that we are strict even today, and we would say that if a non-Jew pours wine, again, this is talking about the pure wine that is not mavushal, that has not been cooked, and so as a result, we're going to say that you have to that you're not allowed to benefit, you're not allowed to drink that wine. You would still, again, you could then pour it back into the bottle and sell that bottle to somebody else, but you're not allowed to drink that wine, because that in fact is the halacha. We make this distinction between a force of pouring, where nothing new is touching the wine, and when something new is touching, something new could be the non-Jew's finger. It could also be the non-Jew's putting a ladle in. It could be a number of things. But the bottom line is that there needs to be something new that's touching in order for the prohibition of benefit. Now, of course, if the bottle of wine itself isn't a kosher bottle of wine, well, then certainly the non-Jews were involved in touching the wine on some level, even indirectly, and so as a result, it would certainly be prohibited. Okay,
so if it's something new, then it's prohibited. We're saying that.
Yeah. So if the idea is that if all the non-Jew does is pick up a bottle of wine and pour it for you, and this is not yayin mavushal, so as a result, we have to worry about yayin nesech. Well, then that wine that has now been poured for you, even though the non-Jew never touched it, all he did was move it, that's going to be prohibited. Okay?
And if
we haven't yet gotten to the whole idea of seals, because that was your question before about what happens if it's closed. If it's a closed bottle of wine, do we still say the same thing? We haven't yet gotten to that. Remember, we saw earlier in the Maseches that if there are 2 seals, maybe that's sufficient, and I assume we're going to get to that again. And so as a result, but if there are 2 seals on it, then this would not be an issue, because then the person's not pouring.
But in this case, if he were to move it and use a ladle, it would be permitted then, right?
No. If he were to use a ladle, then it would not only be prohibited to drink, but it would be prohibited to benefit from, assuming that he knows that it's wine. Again, if he doesn't know that it's wine and he uses a ladle, it's prohibited to drink from. If he uses a ladle and he knows that it's wine, then it's prohibited to benefit from. Okay?
What's the case where it would be permitted?
The case where it would be permitted is if he doesn't use a ladle and he doesn't know that it's wine.
Okay.
Okay, that's the situation. And so that's the situation that we're talking about here. And so as a result, when he doesn't use a ladle and he doesn't know that it's wine, the rabbis aren't going to make a decree, and therefore you're going to be allowed to drink it. And Rashi, actually, if we go back to Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, top Rashi, it's worth taking a quick look at this Rashi, flashing back to Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, 57a. Imishkachna Tana de Aser Rabbi Nassan. Remember that this was a situation where Shmuel was looking to see whether there's somebody. The Gemara was initially thinking that there's somebody who thinks like Rabbi Natan. And remember, the case of Rabbi Natan is the debate was if a non-Jew sticks his hand in the barrel of wine or a foot in the barrel of wine in order to measure it.
Right.
So take a look at Rashi. So yayin behana. So the question is whether or not you would be able to benefit from it. B'mag'o shel ovid kochavim, when a non-Jew touches it. Af al pi shelo naschu la'ovid kochavim, even though he did not engage in any idolatrous worship with it. Denisuch, because when it comes to pouring, lo havi aser bahana ella al yedei shichshuk. The situation is only prohibited when the person puts something in order to move around the wine. He's stirring the wine. And this is based on the following idea, that when it comes to a libation offering, there is the concern is only a libation offering is generally going to involve, if the idol is present, it can be through pouring. Right. But when the idol isn't present, the rabbi's understanding is that the only way you would do a libation is through also mixing. And so if there isn't any mixing of the wine, if there isn't any movement of the wine, of shaking of the wine with something new, so then that's not going to involve nisuch, that is not going to be a potential libation, and therefore it's not going to have the prohibition of benefiting. It will have the prohibition of drinking, but it won't have the prohibition of benefiting. So that's an important Rashi in that context. Okay, so now we come to the next situation. I'm sorry that I didn't scroll. Let me scroll a little bit here. Okay, and so now we come to the next situation. And the Gemara now addresses an idolater who dilutes wine for a Jew. So all they're doing is pouring water into the wine. So here he knows that it's wine, but he is not touching it with something new. So what's the story there? So let's take a look and we'll see. So Bo'amine Rabbi Asim Rabbi Yochanan Yayin Shemisacho Ovid Kochavim Mahu. So a wine that is misacho by an ovid kochavim, we're going to say it's going to mean diluting. What is that? So Amr Lei, Rabbi Yochanan said to him, "Ve'ema mizago. Why are you saying misacho? You should use the term mizago. Mizago is the way the Gemara often refers to mixing." So Amr Lei, Rabbi Asi was saying, "Ana kedeksiv kamina." What do you mean? I'm using a term that the Tanakh itself uses because it says in Mishlei, Tavcha tivcha mascha yena, that she slaughtered her meat and she diluted her wine. Now this is it's in Mishlei, it's a parable, it's a proverb. So the point is that this is actually talking about a wise woman preparing a meal, and it's not actually meant to be understood literally. It's actually referring to how one learns Torah. But in any event, the point is that the term that was used for diluting wine is mascha. So Amr Lei, Rabbi Yochanan says back, Lashon Torah la'atzma, Lashon Chachamim la'atzmo. You have to realize that when you learn Torah, so fine, so Torah has its language. But we're learning halacha and Talmud now. And so as a result, you need to use the language that we're using. It's a very important lesson in language in general that you have to be careful about the language that one uses. So in the end, what's the halacha about this non-Jew who pours water into the wine? So Amar Lei, Rav Asi says, Rav Yochanan says back to Rav Asi, Asr, it's prohibited. And Rashi says Asr. Let's take a look at the prior Rashi. So first we're going to do two Rashis. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There are 14 lines down. First word on the line. I think I got the number of lines right. 14 lines down. Shemasacho. So shemazago, and it means, like, again, he mixes it, he dilutes it. Shenasan bo mayim, he puts water into it. Litakno, in order to fix it. Lishtia, so that it could be drunk. Shekain derech yenam chazak, that their wine was very strong. Kishahayu nosnim oto bakos, when they poured it into the cup. So nosnim bo mayim, they would also pour in water. Lafisha hu chazak, because it was so strong. And
they would dilute it. They would dilute the wine.
Exactly. Yayin shel Yisrael, and we're dealing with a situation where the wine belongs to a Jew. Shemisacho ovid kochavim mahu. And what's the story with it? And now we've gotten the answer. Rabbi Yochanan says, Asr, continuing on in Rashi, Afal gaf lo naga, even though the non-Jew never touched it, Gazu Rabbanan bikocho la'asr b'shtiya. That when we say asr here, we don't mean asr b'hana. We're only saying asr b'shtiya. You're not allowed to drink it. And so as a result, because even though the person never touched it, because mishum harchakas aveira, because we want to keep you away from an aveira. Aval b'hana, when it comes to hana, benefiting from it, vaday lo mitzar, it was certainly not prohibited. Delo adiv minigia al yedei davar acher. Certainly, this is no worse than touching it through something else. Shelo b'kavana, when you have no intention to touch it. Ki ahu denaga beluliva b'chamara v'sharya Rav b'hana, where Rav says that when the lulav touched the wine, we say that it's permitted to benefit from it. So, but you can't drink it. And so the idea is that it's important to understand that there are essentially three levels. There's Asr Bahana, Aser lishtia, but mutter bahana and mutter af lishtia. And so it's important to understand that there are three levels, and depending on the extent to which there was involvement, that will determine and how much the non-Jew knew, that will determine whether or not it's permitted to benefit from, or whether it's even permitted to drink. So and why is it usher? So now we come to the next to the important principle. This is an important principle throughout all of Shas, and even though its context is wine, its context is actually in connection with the Nazir. Mishum lech amrina nazira. We say to the Nazir, go away, go away. Schor lecharma lo tikrab. Go around, go around. Don't go through the vineyard. Don't use the vineyard as a shortcut. Meaning, if you're a Nazir who's not allowed to have grape products, don't go near it. Don't go near it. And now we have a couple of exactly. It's a very important lesson.
Rabbi so the Pirkei Avot says siyag l'Torah chachma.
Exactly, and this is along those lines, 100%. Rabbi Yirmiyah ikla l'savta. So Rabbi Yirmiyah was in Savta. Chaza chamra de mizagi ovdei kochavim ve'ishtei Yisrael mine. And he saw when he got to Savta that the Jews didn't realize that it's a problem to have non-Jews pour water and dilute their wine. V'asr and so therefore, and because he saw them drinking it, and he says v'asr and he said it was prohibited for them. Again, why? Don't come near the vineyard. And Itmar Nami, we have another statement. Rabbi Yochanan. Remember, Rabbi Yochanan was again the one that Rav Asi asked, and some say Amri la Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So some people say it was Rav Asi who said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, maybe because of this incident, that he knew that Rabbi Yochanan said this, Yain shemazago ovid kochavim asur. If you have wine that is diluted by an idolater, it is prohibited. Prohibited for drinking, but not for benefit. Mishum, and the reason is lech amrina nazira. We say to the nazir, go away, skor lechar melotikraf. Don't come close to the to the vineyard. Go around it and stay as far away as possible.
This sounds like a halacha de rabbanan, right? That this is not a
100%.
Torah. It's not
Absolutely.
Torah. So the
100%.
question. So then the question I have is that then would it? So if it's not asur min Torah, and if someone were to drink it, would it be acceptable b'diavad? That I mean, what? See what I mean?
I understand, but the answer is that the rabbis prohibited it, so you would be violating a rabbinic prohibition. It's not like a lechatchila and b'diavad situation. It would be even b'diavad. It would be a problem. Now, if you have situations where you have serious loss, then the fact that it's only rabbinic can begin to play a role. And so, but in general, every year for Christmas, I get a bottle of wine. I don't ask for it. I don't want it. It's not kosher. But the answer is that I actually can't even give it to the postman. I literally have to throw it out because I'm not allowed to benefit from it. And even giving it to the postman or giving it to somebody. So actually I will say that I say to the postman, listen, I can't even accept this. If I know that he's about to give me the box, I say, I don't want it. Because and he'll understand, and he'll just take. Look, you can give it back to them. You can do whatever you want with it. I don't really want it. So, but and even that, is delicate. Exactly. So it is. But if on the other hand, I were to have an entire shipment and some non-Jew, and actually the halacha is. Let's maybe we can do this Tosos. The Tosos has a remarkable thing.
So if you leave the bottle in an open spot and it passes by, you go by the subway station. I don't know. You leave it there. You get deriving benefit from it if someone comes and picks it up.
Yeah, 100%. If I leave it somewhere like that, you're absolutely right. If I put it in some trash can and some goes through and takes it out of the trash can, 100%. That's not going to be a problem. You're 100% right. And so if you leave it out somewhere where somebody can take it and you don't know who it is, etc., you're going to be fine. Now, what happens if you have a really obnoxious non-Jew who says, "I know I can get you, and I'm going to stick my hand lahachas into your barrel of wine." So that actually is dealt with in the third of the in the one, two, three, four, fifth tosos on the daf. First, again, if we take a look at the kasav haria or zarua bisman hazeh over kochavim sheshichshech biyeno shel Yisrael mutter lemachor laovdei kochavim. That actually today's non-Jews, you're allowed to sell it. Now, again, not everybody agrees with it. Delo b'ki b'shichshach, because they don't know how to engage in the worship of idols through mixing the wine. Kid the Parishas Leal, as I explained earlier. Aval b'shtia aser, but it's certainly prohibited to benefit. The davka shalonis kaven liga, but that's only where the person had no intention to touch it. Shalonis kaven liga kedei lahachas, but that's true only where the person, the non-Jew, wasn't trying to be obnoxious and to get you angry. Li Yisrael.
I'm sorry, what Tosfos is this?
This is the fifth Tosos on Nunchet Amabet. It's Kasav Hari, Hari or Zarua, Hariaz. Okay, so again, we're now in the second of the lines. Let's do the end of the second line of that Tosos. Vidavka is the last word on the line. Vidavka shalonis gaben liga kedei lahachas liyisrael ulahafsido. That this, when we say that if the non-Jew mixes it, we're going to say that you can't drink it and you have to sell it to a third party. That's only if his intention is not to upset you and to cause a loss to you. But if in fact the non-Jew's intention is he's really being an obnoxious jerk and he's trying to cause a loss of the wine to you, Sahahu shari afilu bishtia. That is permitted even with drinking. Tikahai gamna lo gazrabanan. The rabbis didn't make this gezerah in order to facilitate cruel non-Jews who are being jerks to make things usher for you. No, that this is in order to separate ourselves from the non-Jews. And so as a result, if the non-Jew is doing it lahachis, it's not going to be prohibited because we're already going to be separated from that non-Jew. So anyway, so I thought that was directly related to what we were talking about, and so as a result, worth going over here. But we've now told one story about a visiting rabbi saying that something is prohibited. Specifically, that was Yayin Nesek. We're going to have another story about a rabbi visiting. Isn't going to necessarily be about wine, but is going to be visiting and seeing somebody doing something wrong, and he's going to say something as well. But for that, you'll need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful Shabbos and look forward to continuing our learning together.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Have a great Shabbos.
Yeah, interesting about accepting gifts.
Yeah.
You got to be very careful.
Have to be careful. Absolutely.